Have you ever felt like you were holding on to something long after it had let go of you? A love that faded, a dream that no longer fits, a version of yourself you've outgrown, yet still protect out of habit or fear. If your heart whispered yes, then this message is for you. Welcome to Lotus of Dharma, where ancient Buddhist wisdom becomes the mirror for the modern soul. Today, we'd explore the gentle yet powerful truth that peace doesn't come from having more, but from holding less. That the path to freedom begins the moment we learn to let go. So take a deep breath. If these words resonate, I invite you to subscribe, to stay with me until the end, because what you hear today may be the beginning of everything your heart has quietly longed for, the art of letting go. The Buddha once offered a profound truth, one that quietly dismantles much of what the world believes. Suffering does not come from pain, it comes from attachment. In this simple statement lies the key to understanding why the human heart aches so deeply, not only when life wounds us, but when we cannot let go of what we wish to keep. We are born into a world of change, yet we behave as though everything should stay the same. We fall in love and expect that love will never shift. We find comfort and assume it should last. We look in a mirror and hope our reflection remains untouched by time. But the Buddha sung with great clarity that everything is impermanent. This is the nature of all conditioned things, annex arising, existing, and passing away. This insight forms the foundation of what the Buddha called the Four Noble Truths, particularly the second noble truth, samadhi, the cause of suffering. It is not pain itself that torments us, but our unwillingness to accept pain as part of life. It is not change that disturbs us, but our resistance to change. We suffer not because things end, but because we believe they never should. Consider the grief of losing a loved one. The sorrow is natural, a reflection of the love we shared. But if we look deeper, we may find that the greatest anguish arises not from the loss itself, but from the story we tell ourselves afterward. They shouldn't have gone. This isn't fair. I can't live without them. In this way, pain becomes suffering through resistance. We do not merely miss the person, we grasp at a reality that no longer exists. There is a story in the old scriptures about a woman who lost her only child. She was inconsolable and came to the Buddha, begging him to bring her son back. With great compassion, the Buddha told her he would help, but first, she must bring him a single mustard seed from a household that had never experienced death. She went from door to door, and in every home, she heard stories of loss. Not one family was spared. By the time she returned, she had not only accepted the death of her child, but also awakened to the truth that no one escapes impermanence. Her healing came not through the reversal of events, but through the release of her grasping. In the modern world, especially in the West, we are taught to chase, to acquire, to achieve. We are told that success means holding on to wealth, to youth, to love, to certainty. We are praised for persistence, for never giving up, for clinging tightly to what we think is ours. But seldom are we taught the sacred art of letting go. Seldom are we told that true peace is not in possessing, but in releasing. The result is a culture that fears endings, avoids change, and resists the natural flow of life. We suffer because we mistake attachment for love. But attachment is not love. It is fear disguised as devotion. It is the belief that we must hold tightly or we will lose everything. But in reality, the tighter we hold, the more we suffer when life moves, as it always does, beyond our grasp. To love someone is not to chain them to our desires, but to honor their path even when it diverges from ours. To experience joy is not to demand it remain forever, but to bow in gratitude when it arises, and to let it pass when it fades. This is not cold detachment, but the warm embrace of wisdom. This is the way of the lotus, which blossoms from the mud yet never clings to it. Suffering ends when we no longer insist that the world bend to our expectations. It ends when we stop arguing with reality. When we let go not with bitterness, but with trust, we step out of suffering and into freedom. Letting go is not weakness. It is the deepest strength. It is the courage to be with life as it is, not as we wish it to be. And in this acceptance, there is great peace, not because nothing changes, but because we are no longer broken when it does. But even as we begin to see the suffering that comes from attachment, the mind resists. It whispers, if I can just control things better, maybe then I won't have to let go. And so, we enter into another illusion, the illusion of control. There was once a mother who loved her son with all her heart. She wanted the best for him, a stable job, a safe path, a life free of hardship. Out of this love, she planned every detail of his future. She decided who he should marry, where he should live, what dreams he should pursue. But as the boy grew into a man, he began to rebel. He no longer fit into the frame she had built for him. She tried to hold on tighter, convinced that if she let go, he would lose his way. And yet, the tighter she held, the farther he drifted, not just physically, but emotionally, until she could no longer recognize the child she once cradled in her arms. It wasn't until many years later, when she sat alone in her garden, that the realization came. She had not loved him, she had loved her idea of him. She had not trusted the unfolding of his path, she had clung to her own blueprint. And in doing so, she had lost sight of a beautiful, living soul in front of her. This is how control seduces thus. It promises safety. It pretends to be love. But underneath, it is fear, fear of loss, fear of uncertainty, fear of not being enough unless everything goes according to plan. But the Buddha taught, everything is impermanent. This is the truth of anicca, that nothing lasts, not joy, not sorrow, not even the self we cling to so tightly. The breath rises and falls. The seasons come and go. People enter our lives and leave. To live in harmony with reality is to honor the stance of change, not resist it. We suffer because we expect permanence in a world made of sand. We build castles by the sea and cry when the waves return to claim them. But the sea was always coming. The tide was always turning. Letting go, then, is not defeat. It is not resignation. Letting go is not giving up, it is giving in to truth. The truth that we never truly held anything to begin with. That people are not possessions. That time is not ours to command. That life, in all its mystery, is not a puzzle to be solved, but a wave to be ridden, a breeze to be felt, a moment to be lived. When we stop trying to hold the wind in our hands, we begin to feel its beauty on our skin. To let go is to trust. To trust that even as things fall apart, something deeper is being revealed. Something softer. Something freer. Something that does not need to be controlled because it is already whole. And in that surrender, we find peace. But perhaps now you wonder, what does it truly mean to let go? Because the mind, shaped by years of striving and stories, often mistakes letting go for indifference. It imagines passivity, weakness, or even failure. Yet in the light of the Dharma, letting go is none of these things. It is not a collapse. It is not an escape. It is a return to truth, a return to the present, a return to what is. Letting go does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop clinging. It means you release your grip on how life must unfold. It means you make space, not just around you, but within you, for peace to arise without condition. Imagine this. 2 monks were walking together, and they came upon a river where a woman stood, unable to cross. One monk, Without hesitation, lifted her onto his back and carried her across. Hours later, the other monk, clearly disturbed, said, "You know our vows. We are not to touch women. Why did you carry her?" The first monk smiled and replied, "Brother, I left her at the river. Why are you still carrying her?" This is the nature of the mind. It holds onto things long after they have passed. It clings to slights, regrets, fears, identities. We carry not just people, but conversations, arguments, expectations, failures, and they become a burden heavier than any physical load. To let go is to put down what no longer serves. It is to walk lighter, freer, more awake. But make no mistake, letting go is an act of courage. It asks us to surrender the known for the unknown. It asks us to trust in the law of impermanence, to open our hands when all we want to do is grasp tighter. It means saying, even though I do not know what tomorrow brings, I choose to release my need to control it. There is great dignity in that. We often think we must change the world around us to be at peace. But in truth, we need only change our relationship to it. We do not need to fix every person, secure every outcome, or understand every mystery. We need only soften our resistance and meet each moment with an open heart. Letting go is not the end of the story, it is the beginning. The beginning of seeing things as they are, not as we wish them to be. The beginning of relating to life not through fear, but through presence. The beginning of a love that no longer binds, but blesses. And in that space, healing begins. Letting go begins not with the hands, but with the eyes of awareness. We cannot release what we do not see. And so the first practice is this: observe. Sit quietly. Close your eyes. Feel your breath rise and fall like the tide. And then, watch. Watch what arises in your heart, the memories, the fears, the names, the faces. Watch without grabbing them. Watch without pushing them away. Let them pass through you like birds flying across a wide sky. Do not judge. Do not analyze. Simply be the witness. The Buddha compared the untrained mind to a monkey, jumping from branch to branch, restless and reactive. But the trained mind is like a still lake, reflecting the world clearly, yet disturbed by nothing. When we observe our attachments with mindfulness, we begin to see their shape. We begin to recognize what we are holding onto, not just people or things, but identities, roles, should-have-beens, and what-ifs. You may discover that what you are truly clinging to is not the person who left, but the version of yourself you were when they were still beside you. Not the job you lost, but the sense of worth it gave you. When this becomes clear, the illusion begins to dissolve on its own, not through force, but through understanding. Awareness is the first doorway. Walk through it gently. Once you have seen what you are holding, the next step is to ask, why am I afraid to let this go? This question is not meant to be answered with logic, but with presence. Sit with the fear. Let it speak. You may hear, I'm afraid I'll be alone. I'm afraid I'll be forgotten. I'm afraid I'll lose myself. Beneath every attachment is a fear. Beneath every fear is a wound. And every wound is calling out not for control, but for compassion. This is why the Dharma does not teach us to push away or suppress, but to understand. Because when we understand the root of our clinging, it begins to soften. What was once a chain around our heart becomes a thread we can gently untie. Ask again, who am I without this person, this role, this belief? The mind may panic. It will scramble for answers. But the soul, if you listen closely, will whisper, You are free. Self-inquiry is not about fixing what's broken. It's about seeing that you are not broken. You were simply afraid. And now, you are learning a new way, the way of release, not because you must, but because you are ready. True letting go does not arise from anger. It arises from compassion. There are many who say, "I'm done. I've let go," when in truth, they are still carrying the weight, just buried under bitterness. That is not release. That is resistance in disguise. To truly let go is to forgive, not just the other, but yourself. Forgive yourself for the years you clung. Forgive yourself for believing this was your only path. Forgive yourself for not knowing how to let go, until now. The Buddha taught that compassion is like water. It softens what is hard. When we direct this compassion inward, the places we once clenched begin to open. And when we direct it outward, even to those who hurt us, we untie the karmic knots that keep us bound. This does not mean we accept injustice. It does not mean we forget harm. But it means we no longer chain our peace to another's actions. Say to yourself, "I release you, not because what happened was right, but because I no longer wish to suffer." Letting go with compassion is not cold. It is the warmest form of wisdom. It is not the closing of the heart, but the expansion of it. And finally, the simplest and most profound practice of all, the breath. Breathing is life's way of teaching us impermanence. You cannot hold onto a breath. You cannot rush it. You can only receive it and let it go. In every moment, you are practicing letting go, whether you realize it or not. Sit. Breathe in slowly. Feel the breath fill your lungs. Then exhale gently, and as you do, whisper silently, "I let go." Again. Inhale. "I receive the present." Exhale. "I release the past." You do not need to control the letting go. The breath will teach you. The body already knows. What we call clinging is often the mind's noise, and the breath, like a bell, returns us to silence. Practice this daily. In the morning, before the noise of the world begins. At night, when your heart is tired. And in those sacred in-between moments, waiting in line, walking alone, pausing before you speak. Every breath is an invitation to return, to now. And here, in this stillness, letting go is no longer a struggle. It becomes a way of being, natural, spacious, and full of peace. Let us now leave the realm of theory and enter the living world, where real people, with real pain and real courage, discover what it truly means to let go. Because this path is not just for monks or mystics. It is for mothers and fathers, for lovers and seekers, for anyone whose heart has been broken and longs to be whole again. One, the woman who let go of her past. There was once a woman who carried a wound for over 20 years. Her husband had left her suddenly, no explanation, no closure, only a note by the door. She raised their children alone, built her life from scratch, yet a quiet bitterness followed her like a shadow. She wore strength like armor, but inside, she was tired, not from the past itself, but from holding it so tightly. One day, she joined a mindfulness retreat. The teacher asked them to write a letter, not to send, but to release. In that letter, she poured out her sorrow, her rage, her unanswered questions. Then, they burned the letters by a small fire under the stars. She said she didn't feel different right away. But a week later, she realized something subtle had shifted. She no longer rehearsed old arguments in her mind. She stopped checking his name online. The weight was gone. She said, I used to believe that letting go meant I had to forget him. But now I see, it just meant I no longer had to carry him. To the father who released his son's path. A man once told me about his teenage son, brilliant, but rebellious. The boy dropped out of college, moved far away, and pursued a life of art and music instead of the stable career his father had dreamed for him. The father tried everything: lectures, threats, guilt. He felt ashamed, confused, even betrayed. But none of it brought his son closer. One evening, sitting in quiet despair, the father picked up a book on Buddhist teachings. One line stopped him cold: "You cannot shape another soul without first honoring its freedom." That night, for the first time, he did not pray for his son to change. He prayed for the strength to trust. Weeks passed. Months. And then, slowly, his son began to call more. To visit. Not because he was forced, but because the space was safe. The father said to me later, "When I let go of who I thought he should be, I finally met the man he was becoming." And that was beautiful. Free the young woman and the body she couldn't love. Another story, one that is all too common, is of a young woman who hated her own reflection. Every mirror was a battlefield. Every meal, a negotiation. She was chasing perfection, but it always slipped just beyond reach. She began to meditate, not to let go, but to gain control. She wanted mastery over her cravings, her habits, her shame. But meditation doesn't offer control, it offers truth. And the truth was this: she wasn't fighting her body. She was fighting her fear of not being loved, of not being enough. One morning, after months of practice, she sat in front of a mirror. Not to fix, not to criticize, but just to look. To breathe. To see the human behind the image. She cried. Not from sadness, but from release. Later, she wrote in her journal, "I spent years trying to change myself so others would love me. But when I stopped clinging to their approval, I started loving myself." Each of these stories is different, but the essence is the same. When we let go, life begins again. Not in some distant paradise, but here, in the ordinary, sacred now. Letting go does not mean life will never hurt, but it means the pain will not define us. We are no longer prisoners of what has passed. We become students of what is possible. And that, dear one, is the silent miracle of this path. And now, dear friend, we arrive at the quiet shore of this journey, not with fanfare or fireworks, but with a gentle hush that follows true understanding. We have spoken of attachment, of control, of the silent courage it takes to let go. And perhaps, somewhere in your heart, a knot has loosened. Not all the way, not yet, but enough to breathe a little deeper. Letting go is not something we do once and forget. It is not a single act of release, but a way of being, a continuous practice, like breathing, or walking, or bowing. It is the soft decision we make, again and again, to stop resisting what is, to stop clinging to what was, to stop fearing what might come. To let go is not to lose. It is to return to yourself, to the present, to the deep knowing that you were never broken, never lacking, never truly alone. You were simply carrying too much. The Buddha never promised a life free from pain. He never said we would not lose what we love, or face things we fear. But he did offer something infinitely more precious, the end of suffering. Not the end of emotion, not the end of grief, but the end of the struggle against them. The end of adding our resistance to what life naturally brings. When we stop demanding permanence from impermanence, we find peace. When we stop insisting that life follow our script, we begin to see the beauty of the unfolding. When we loosen the grip on our need to control, we begin to feel held by something far greater, the flow of life itself. And this is the gift of letting go. Not the absence of feeling, but the presence of wisdom. Not cold detachment, but warm, spacious clarity. Not losing what matters, but discovering that what truly matters cannot be lost. So if you are carrying sorrow, let it sit beside you, but not on your shoulders. If you are carrying fear, hold it with kindness, but do not obey it. And if you are carrying stories of who you should be, of what should have happened, of what might never be, bow to them gently, and then let them drift away like autumn leaves on the wind. Let go, not because you must, but because it is time. Let go, not to escape life, but to fully enter it. Let go, not to give up, but to come home. And in that home, where nothing is forced and nothing is clung to, you may finally hear the quiet truth the Buddha whispered across centuries. You are already free. Let it be. Let yourself be. And may peace walk with you, wherever the path leads. If these words touch something within you, I invite you to pause for a moment and share your reflection in the comments below. What have you been holding on to? And what, perhaps, are you now ready to release? If you feel this message may help someone else, consider sending it to them, quietly, gently, as an offering of peace. And if you wish to continue walking this path with us, I welcome you to subscribe to this channel, Lotus of Dharma, where each teaching is an invitation to come home, again and again, to the stillness within. Until then, breathe deeply, walk gently, and remember, you are not alone.